In this class we want to talk about resistance to change. For a start, people are creatures of habit, and for this reason we often resist change. We don't like newness. We don't like it certainly forced upon us. So one of the big resistances to change comes from within us. We don't like changing what we're familiar with. And it's this loss of familiarity and routine that hurts us most. However, change is inevitable. And that's stated right throughout the change literature in many videos we've done and in many of the books and journals. It is inevitable. If change hadn't taken place, we'd still be sitting in a cave. Actually, we'd be sitting outside the cave because we wouldn't have worked out how to use the cave. But right since the earliest times, we have been subject to change, and we have sought change. Liz Clark, quite a famous writer in the area, believes that managers often underestimate the impact of change on people and handle change insensitively. And that may be a bit harsh, but sometimes we don't really understand the impact of change on people and on organisations, the full impact at least, and perhaps we only realise this a long time after the change has happened. So there is an element of understanding required when change is being proposed. We must recognise why people within an organisation are resistant to change. And we must look for reasons and account for why they're resistant to change and try to help them over that resistance. Liz Clark lists 7 major factors believed to cause resistance to change. First of all, there's a loss of control. When change happens, there's a powerlessness, we feel. It happened, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's inevitable. We liked the old system, we don't like the new system, but it has to grow on us. We have to become familiar with it, and it takes time. But the initial response is we don't like it. It's a loss of control. It was pushed onto us. The second is the question that's often posed. Why are we doing it? The system works perfectly well as it is, so why are we changing it? This requires communications. If there is a change proposed, then what are the benefits from the change? And how will those benefits be spread around, and who will benefit? And why should workers and junior managers participate in this and cooperate? What's in it for them? There's also the problem of not understanding the change. What is being proposed? We're not sure about what the outcomes will be after the change. It's introducing uncertainty, and it's confusing the picture. Perhaps the workers know what the system is now, but they are unsure about what the system will be in the future. So their natural response is to resist it. Certainly quick decisions are not good ideas, generally speaking. Quick decisions will lead almost instantaneously to a resistance to change. As people, as creatures of habit, we need to accept change. We accept it over time. We need to understand it fully. We need to understand its implications, how it's going to affect us, how it's going to affect others, why it's happening, what skills and aptitudes are required, and what retraining is required. And we need to know lots of things, but we will only accept it over time. There may be a loss of faith. The old system worked, and people had invested time and effort, mental energy in developing the system, in running the system. Now it's going to be changed. Well, that's an acceptance that the old system was bad. Now the people who had invested so much time and sang its praises, they will be associated with the old system. So they themselves are obsolete, like the old system. They're a part of the past. And there's a loss of face. They were committed to a system that wasn't working, at least by the proposed change standards. There's also the issue of, can people cope with the change? Have they got the skills? Have they got the education? Have they got the willingness, the application to participate in the company after the change has been implemented? What training and what support will be in place to help them to cope with this newness, this new way of doing things? And what's the motivation anyway for the change? Will it lead to more work? It'll almost certainly be the case that familiar tasks will become unfamiliar because there's a new technology or there's a new design that's now being put in place. So there's a loss of familiarity again. Valerie Stewart believes that workers resist change due to a lack of information, and she talks about 5 different types of ambiguity. First of all, there's the goal ambiguity, when the workforce do not know the objectives of the organisation. If they don't know what the objectives of the organisation are, then the workers find it difficult to participate fully. So if they don't know what the problem is, then they can't fix it, and they can't collaborate fully in some change that's going to be implemented because they don't know what the goal is in the first place. There could be data ambiguity. Sometimes people are making changes without full information. They're guessing that this is a better system, it'll work better than the previous system, but there's no data, there's no hard evidence to suggest this. So they're asking workers and managers to participate in the change without proving it, without being able to make a solid case. It's more a matter of belief. Role ambiguity. When systems change, people's existing roles become challenged. A manager who was looking after a department, after the change, the department will have changed, and perhaps the manager will therefore feel threatened that his or her job will no longer be required. So that's an issue. Then we have method ambiguity. This arises when people do not know how to achieve the goals. So even if everyone participates and say, yes, we will have the change, we still have a problem. How? How will the change be implemented? How will the change be managed? How will the change be run? And given it's never happened before, this is the first time this change has been implemented, there is an ambiguity about the method that will be used. There's also criterion ambiguity. When do people know when the objective has been met? They need to know what the objective is, but then they need to know when it's been met. When is the change finished? When has the change been fully implemented? When will the business now settle down to running in a routine manner again? Those are resistances to change, as seen by Valerie Stewart. There can be resistances due to lack of information. These different types of ambiguity can overlap in some situations. And the stress caused by the lack of information, well, this causes over-defining problems and only focusing on objectives which can be clearly defined. It can also lead to disorganized thinking, as people are less thorough and more thoughtless in decision making. The stress, the ambiguity, the confusion that we talked about under the lack of information problem that's leading to resistance to change. According to Hudinsky and Buchanan, Bedian talks about 4 reasons for resistance to change. Self-interest. I stated earlier, people like their environments to remain stable. Their present situation may be favourable to them, and therefore they don't want to disrupt it. They don't want change. They're happy with the status quo. There's a misunderstanding or a lack of trust. They don't know what the management are really up to, and they're not sure if by cooperating they're going to engineer their own redundancy. They're going to collaborate in a way that makes them superfluous. They're not required anymore. Not sure what will happen. Plus, when change is proposed, lots of workers and managers and stakeholders will be interpreting the outcomes of the change differently. There will be lots of ideas and theories about what will happen in the future if the change goes ahead. And generally speaking, some people will adopt the worst scenarios. They will adopt very negative positions based on all of these theories and all of the ideas floating around, which are not necessarily accurate, but just out of conversations, that's what may emerge. We don't like change, as I said several times. We find it stressful and it causes anxiety. So we just don't want it. We want life to go as it is now, if we can. So change is not something that we take too easily. Resistance to change depends on those being affected bringing their own interests, goals, and group relationships into account when assessing the change. Well, when resistance to change is recognized, I think we have to also recognize that people are complex. They have families, they have friends, they live in communities. All of them have different objectives and goals. All of them have inputs either into the business or into the influence of the person involved in the change. So perhaps a worker will talk to his family about the change, who may add to the anxiety because they feel threatened as well. Or the wider society may have a view that the change is disruptive or unnecessary, or it may be positive. I'm giving the predominantly the negative view here, of course, but you could take the positive in a lot of this as well. Cantor, another writer in the area, gives reasons for change. Could be loss of control, too much uncertainty. These are almost self-explanatory. Surprise costs, costs of confusion. I mean, sometimes things just happen. We have a change proposed, the change has been implemented, and something just happened. It wasn't forecast. And that leads to resistance. We don't trust it anymore. We don't trust this change. It can lead to surprises. We don't want surprises in our work lives. We want certainty. Loss of face, we've discussed. concerns about competencies, about our skills and abilities to handle the change, more work, ripple effects, one we haven't talked about. When a change happens, it may happen within one department, but the effects may be felt in other departments in the business. So if it is a redesign of a particular component, it may have issues in the stores, in stocking the item, or in packaging for distribution. So sometimes changes are not confined to one local area. They have a ripple effect onto different people, different departments, different businesses, into society. There's also past resentments. Again, we haven't talked about this. Sometimes people have had bad experiences of change in the past, and invariably they go back and say, well, look, we experienced a change X years ago and it wasn't good. We had to undo it all. So what we've got works, so why change it now? Simply because it didn't work in the past doesn't mean it's not going to work now, but that's beside the point. The resistance to change is there because of past experiences. And there could also be real threats. There might be some evidence to suggest that the change is not going to work. Perhaps there's doubts about the technology, or perhaps academics or governments or whoever have published papers or discussions to say that this change, if implemented, could be detrimental to society or a local community or whatever. We often get these discussions, particularly in the context of, let's say, nuclear power. There's always a debate about whether nuclear fission should be allowed, and how dangerous is it, and waste disposal and so on. So there's a resistance to change. Managers are seen as being in a different class to workers. This creates a division between the two sets of groups, and may also be a resistance to change there. For example, the managers may be very keen on the change because perhaps it will reduce the workforce, but increase the profitability and increase their pay, their salaries. Could be. In which case, the workers will resist the change, will not cooperate with it. The management will want it. And this has happened in many industries over a long period of time. So there might be resistance to change because of mistrust on the part of management. So now we've seen quite a lot of areas that can affect change, a lot of issues that can affect change and can resist the change. So the fact that a change is proposed is not a smooth journey. It can be resisted at different levels and with different intensities. So that, I think, concludes this talk on the resistance to change. Thank you for watching.